name is Minister Wallace, and again, I thank you for tuning in and joining in on my channel. By means of encouragement, I just want to go over a well-known story, an illustration within the Old Testament, Daniel in the lion's den. That's typically the name of it that we remember it by, and it's found in Daniel chapter 6. I believe there are a few great things, a few great attributes about Daniel and things that he did that we can pull out of this to encourage us in 2017. Now, we know the basic premise of the story is that Daniel was a faithful servant of God. He worshiped God. But Daniel, like us, found himself worshiping God in a land where God was not welcome. God was not accepted by everyone around Daniel. Nevertheless, Daniel continued to faithfully serve God. Another interesting thing about Daniel, and you see down through the text, is that Daniel not only faithfully served God in a land who didn't readily accept God, but Daniel also showed love to those who did not accept God. Now, it doesn't say Daniel changed his life and started believing and doing and accepting everything that those who did not believe God did. It doesn't say that. The Bible does not. But it does say that Daniel faithfully worshiped God. Daniel took a stance. He faithfully worshiped God, and he continued to show love to those who didn't. So as the story goes, we know that Daniel had a couple of haters, or folks who really they just didn't appreciate those two attributes about Daniel. And it wasn't necessarily King Darius, but it was those who served King Darius. They didn't like how Daniel faithfully served God, but less alone, he was also nice and showed love to King Darius. So they devised a scheme. They devised a scheme that was going to force King Darius to have to pronounce a sentence upon Daniel. And I want you to look at Daniel chapter 6, verse 3. It says, and it's talking about what a great attitude that Daniel had in this land who didn't readily accept God. It says in Daniel 6:3, it says, "Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit. And the king and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom." Because of Daniel's good attitude, because of the love that he showed to those who did not love God, then Daniel was not only serving as an example, but of an example of what God can do, but an example also of who God is. This is another lesson that we can learn, that we are, in an evangelistic sense, we are direct representatives of God. So the way that we conduct ourselves, not at church around other believers who have already accepted God, but how we conduct ourselves out in the world, wherever you are out in the world. If you're outside the church, well, actually, if you're in the church, you sometimes can be in the world too. But when you are outside of the church, you are probably amongst a majority of unbelievers. Yes, they aggressive. Yes, it's nowhere that you can turn to. It seems like it's nowhere that you can turn to find somebody or something that supports God. But the Bible tells us clearly that the world is not going to support God. It never has. Nevertheless, Daniel had a great attitude. He had a great attitude, and he continued to show love. It was making an effect on King Darius. Nevertheless, Daniel was finally, those who had schemes against him, he was brought up on charges, right? And it was time for King Darius, sort of reluctantly, what we can kind of tell in the text, that King Darius didn't necessarily want to sentence him to it, but the law was the law. So he walks Daniel down, and he puts him into the lion's den. Now, something to remember about these lions: this was a normal a custom of punishment. So these lions weren't fed very often, so they was hungry. Your chances of surviving was slim to none, mostly none. So as he locks Daniel up in the lion's den, King Darius says, kind and I'll paraphrase a little, that I hope the Lord, the God that you're so faithful to, will save you. The story goes on to say, King Darius retired back to his quarters. Now, interestingly enough, King Darius did not get a lot of sleep. And from the context of the passage, it wasn't necessarily that we see that King Darius was just kind of wanted Daniel to die. King Darius wasn't. We can tell by the context of the passage that King Darius wasn't real comfortable with the decision that he made because, like we said, Daniel had made a great impression. It's just that Daniel wouldn't worship the king. But nevertheless, it's amazing how Daniel showing love was slowly cutting through it. Well, the Bible says that King Darius did not get any rest. He did not get any rest. It says when dawn came, he leapt to his feet. King Darius ran towards the place where Daniel was. And the Bible even indicates that King Darius was a little bit, his voice was he was a little worried about Daniel, but he yells out, and this is the part that I love. King Darius, as he's on the way to the den, to where he had left Daniel with the hungry lions, King Darius yells out, Daniel, Daniel, has the Lord that you pray to, has he saved you? And the thing that I love, what Daniel yells back, the first thing that he yells back, it says that Daniel responds, O King, live forever. Through all of that, he done threw you in the lion's den. You know your God has saved you. The first thing that Daniel does is exactly what thousands of years later Christ echoes to us. The first thing he does is show love to the king. He says, "O King, live forever." In other words, I'm fine. I'm doing just fine. Daniel goes on to say in verse 22, it says, Daniel says, "My God sent his angels to shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me." Daniel gives the reason why they have not harmed him. Now Daniel is talking to King Darius, still from within the lion's den. He says, "Because I was found blameless before him," God. He goes on to say, "And also before you, O King, because I have done you no harm." So many things that we can learn from this illustration within the Old Testament, but some of the key ones are, yes, we live in a world that does not accept God. They never really ever have. But yet, we still are commanded, illustrated, shown, and told to continue to have faith in and continue to worship God. And also, we are told to continue to show love to your neighbor. This showing love does not mean that you completely agree with and consent to and participate in and just readily accept everything that the world does. No, it does not. It tells you to love the Lord your God with all your heart, and Christ also tell you to love your neighbor. So I think we can learn a lot from this. Sometimes we can even change our train of thought that it may not be Daniel in the lion's den, but as many of you have probably seen and read, there's many books. But sometimes we just change our mindset to think more of the lions in Daniel's den. Because Daniel didn't have no worries. He probably got a great night's sleep. The text doesn't tell us that, but he probably got a great night's sleep because he woke up, he responded in confidence that my God shut the mouths of the lions because I'm not guilty before him. So I would implore you to not be guilty before God. You don't have to conform to what the world does, because then you'll find yourself guilty before God. So let's stay innocent before God and continue to show love to your neighbor. Again, my name is Minister Wallace. I thank you for joining in. God bless.